I'll never forget the sound that morning. It wasn't the calm hum of tractors in the distance or the low whistle of wind through the fence posts. No, it was tires screeching against gravel. Two black SUVs came whipping around the corner of my lane like they were chasing a fugitive. Red and blue lights flickered from their roofs, cheap light bars, the kind you'd see in a clearance bin, but to the neighbors watching from behind their curtains it looked official enough. For a moment the whole street froze. Curtains shifted, dogs barked, and then I saw her, Karen, our HOA president, standing there in her fire engine red suit, arms crossed, lips pressed tight, like she'd been waiting for this exact scene to play out. The SUVs slammed to a stop right at my gate, dust rising in a choking cloud. Out jumped four men, each dressed in matching black uniforms with patches stitched on their sleeves. HOA security enforcement. They shouted that I was under arrest for non-compliance. Arrested by the HOA, I almost laughed until I noticed something dangling from one of their belts. Handcuffs, plastic ones, the price tag still hanging from the chain. I swear, if it wasn't happening in my own driveway, I would have thought it was a parody skit. But in that moment, my neighbors didn't see the party store props. They saw uniforms, flashing lights, and four men barking orders. Fear has a funny way of short-circuiting common sense. I heard gasps ripple down the street. One woman muttered, "Oh my God, they're taking him." And through it all, Karen's smirk widened. She looked like a lottery winner who finally got to cash in her ticket. What none of them realized was that a different sound was already rolling over the horizon. A sound that would change everything. But I'll get to that later. When I first bought this property, I thought I was escaping all this nonsense. After 25 years grinding 9 to 5, I'd saved enough for a little farmhouse, wide porches, acres of peace. Best of all, no HOA jurisdiction. No ridiculous fines for leaving a trash can out too long. No letters demanding I repaint my shutters beige. No strangers telling me what kind of mailbox I could own. Just me, my land, and freedom, or so I thought. From day one, Karen had it out for me. She stormed across my driveway the very first week I moved in. Clipboard in hand, face pinched so tight it looked painful. "You'll need to register with the HOA immediately," she barked like she was serving a warrant. I chuckled. "Ma'am, I'm not in your HOA. My deed is clear. Your rules don't apply here." The way she froze, it was like I'd just told her gravity didn't exist. Her face puckered, eyes narrowed, and she snapped. "Everyone in this community follows the rules." That was the first taste of the war to come. Within a week, half the neighborhood was whispering about me. Some of the older folks welcomed me with pies and handshakes, happy someone was free of Karen's grip. But others, they looked away when I walked by, afraid to be seen talking to me. Fear was her greatest weapon, and she wielded it like a pro. Soon the rumors started. I didn't pay dues, I was building illegally, my fence was dangerous. My fence, by the way, had been standing longer than her entire HOA, but that didn't matter. What mattered was perception. Then came the letters, white envelopes with a shiny golden seal. Homeowners Association Compliance Notice. The first demanded $120 in delinquent dues. I nearly spit my coffee all over the porch. Dues, on land they didn't control, straight into the burn barrel it went. A week later, another letter claimed my driveway encroached on common property and had to be removed. My driveway had been there since the 70s. This one made me laugh too, but then I noticed the seal. It looked wrong. The eagle had uneven wings like a teenager had doodled it. That's when the thought hit me. If I could see it was fake, would my neighbors notice? Or would they see a shiny stamp and believe every word? That's when the SUVs first appeared, parked down the lane, headlights off. A man snapping photos of my barn with a telephoto lens. At the time, I brushed it off. Paranoia, I told myself, but looking back, it was all part of the act. The letters, the gossip, the fake seals, they were building up to something bigger. I should call the sheriff right then. Any sane person would. But here's the thing, I've dealt with bullies before, schoolyard ones, corporate ones. They all follow the same playbook. They puff out their chest, they count on fear to do the heavy lifting. But the second you call their bluff, they unravel. And I wasn't about to let some suburban dictator with a clipboard scare me off my land. So I stood firm. I told myself whatever storm she was brewing, I'd face it head-on. What I didn't realize was just how far she was willing to go. That morning when the black SUVs skidded to a stop, when those fake officers shouted for me to step forward, it became clear. Karen wasn't bluffing anymore. She staged her own police force. And as ridiculous as it looked, the crooked badges, the fake handcuffs, it was still dangerous, because my neighbors believed it. For those few seconds, they thought I was about to be dragged away in front of them. They thought the HOA had real power to arrest me. That's how fear works. It blinds people. I leaned on my gate, calm as I could manage, my phone already recording. I wasn't just going to face Karen's circus. I was going to expose it. What none of us knew, not even Karen herself, was that behind her little parade of real law enforcement was already on its way. And when they arrived, everything would change. They shouted for me to step forward. Their boots crunched on the gravel, and one of them fumbled with his plastic handcuffs like he was about to make an arrest. Neighbors lined the sidewalk, their faces a mixture of fascination and fear. I could almost hear their thoughts. Is he really a criminal? Did we misjudge him all along? Karen chose that moment to step out of her shiny. Clipboard clutched against her chest, chin lifted like royalty. She looked around the cul-de-sac as though she owned every inch of it. "It's over, mister," she said, her voice cutting through the morning air. "You mocked the HOA for the last time. Now you'll face the consequences." I raised an eyebrow and leaned against my gate. Calm, steady. "Karen," I said, loud enough for my camera to capture, "if I didn't know better, I'd think you raided the clearance aisle at Party City." That one line earned a ripple of nervous laughter from a few neighbors, but Karen's smirk faltered for just a second. Then, with a sharp snap of her fingers, she motioned to her so-called officers. "Take him in." They advanced, trying to look tough. One tripped on the curb and had to jog to catch up. Another kept fiddling with his radio, pretending to talk to some imaginary headquarters. Their uniforms were wrinkled, patches sewn on crooked, and I swear one guy had his tag still dangling from his shirt collar. It would have been funny if it wasn't so dangerous. Because here's the truth, fear doesn't care about details. Fear doesn't stop to ask, does that badge look fake? It just reacts. And for a moment, even my closest neighbors looked convinced that I was a criminal about to be hauled away. I raised my phone higher, making sure the red recording light was visible. "These clowns aren't real cops," I said clearly. "No name tags, no badges. And since when does the sheriff's office operate under the name HOA Security Enforcement?" That got people murmuring. Doubt spread across the crowd. Mrs. Parker, who had once brought me pies, frowned. The Wilson kids clutched each other, whispering. I could feel the tide starting to turn, but Karen wasn't about to lose control. "Don't listen to him," she screeched, her voice cracked, shrill, desperate. "He's dangerous. He's a threat to our community. Arrest him." One of them reached for the gate latch. The metal groaned as he rattled it. Another waved his fake badge inches from my face. I could see the laminate peeling at the corners. "Last chance," their leader barked, holding out the zip ties like he'd done this before. I tilted my head, smiling calmly. "Funny thing about last chances," I said. "They usually backfire when you're the one bluffing." Karen's eyes blazed. "Enough of this. Break the gate if you have to." That was her mistake, because the moment those words left her lips, I heard it, at first faint like a low heartbeat in the distance, then louder, a deep, rhythmic thump that rattled my chest, helicopter rotors. The froze, their heads tilting skyward. Shadows rolled across the neighborhood, and then came the sound of engines, heavy, powerful engines, nothing like the knockoff sirens Karen had strapped to her SUVs. Down the lane, real law enforcement vehicles rolled into view. Not matte black with duct-taped light bars, but armored, gleaming SUVs with piercing strobes that lit up the morning. Behind them, a convoy of officers in tactical gear fanned out, rifles slung, helmets gleaming in the sun. The crowd gasped. Mrs. Parker clutched her pearls. Kids pointed, their mouths open in awe. Even the bravado melted. One muttered under his breath, "Oh, hell." And for the first time, Karen's smirk faltered. She looked from her fake police force to the line of real SWAT rolling in behind them. But instead of stopping, she doubled down. Arms flung wide like she was starring in her own play, she shouted. "See, even more support has arrived. You can't win, mister." The neighbors exchanged glances, their expressions saying it all. "Lady, are you insane?" I smirked, steady as ever. "Karen," I said, "you might want to turn around." But she didn't. She barked orders instead, her voice cracking with desperation. Break this gate. Show him we mean business. One of the tried climbing over, his boots scraping against the metal. Another yanked harder at the lock, his hands shaking. I finally let the steel enter my voice. Touch this gate and you'll regret it. They hesitated. The roar of helicopters overhead grew deafening. Dust whipped through the cul-de-sac, leaves spiraling into the air. Shadows from the circling rotors fell across the scene. The real convoy screeched to a halt. Doors swung open. Out stepped men in full tactical gear. Sheriff's Department, drop your weapons, hands in the air. The street erupted into chaos. Neighbors screamed. The panicked, fumbling with their toy radios and zip ties, and Karen spun around like a woman waking from a dream she didn't want to end. "This is a mistake," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "They're with me." But the SWAT leader didn't even look at her. His team moved like a machine, covering angles, barking orders, securing the one by one. The fake cops dropped to the pavement faster than sacks of potatoes, their hands scrambling above their heads. Karen stood frozen, clipboard trembling in her hands. The red of her blazer blazed against the dust-filled morning, but the smirk was gone. In its place was sheer panic. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about the entire neighborhood. For years, Karen had ruled through fear. But now, with her fake cops face down on the asphalt and real SWAT barking orders over the roar of helicopters, her kingdom was collapsing. I lifted my phone a little higher, catching every second. "Smile for the camera, Karen," I said under my breath. "The internet loves a good comedy." Because the show was only just beginning. You'd think the sight of men in full tactical gear would end the circus right then and there. Normal people, when rifles are trained, when armored SUVs block the street, when helicopters thunder overhead, they stop. They shut up. They surrender. But Karen, she wasn't built like that. The second her hit the ground, her voice rose above the roar of the rotors. "Stand up! Don't let them intimidate you!" She screamed at her fake cops, her blazer whipping in the wind like some ragged battle flag. She spun toward the real SWAT, stabbing her clipboard in the air like it was a weapon. "This is HOA jurisdiction. You have no authority here." The silence that followed was almost comical. One officer, visor reflecting the chaos, just stared at her. "Authority? Lady, you're waving a clipboard at men who breach barricades for a living." But Karen doubled down. She snapped her fingers, and one of the still kneeling hands zip-tied fumbled with his belt pouch. To my horror, he pulled out a stun baton. It crackled weakly, the sound closer to a bug zapper than a weapon, but the intent was clear. He staggered upright, shouting, "Back off." The SWAT officers pivoted instantly. Rifles trained, commands boomed, "Drop it now." My chest tightened. For a heartbeat, the air turned electric. One wrong move and we were inches from tragedy. The glanced at Karen, who shrieked, "Don't you dare drop it!" But then his eyes darted back to the rifles pointed at his chest. His hand trembled. The baton clattered to the asphalt. For half a second, relief rippled through the street. But Karen wasn't done. She stomped her heels so hard the clipboard shook in her grip. "Cowards," she spat. "You're supposed to protect me. Arrest him." She jabbed her finger straight at me, her voice breaking under the weight of panic. And that was all it took for another one of her fake cops to snap. He lunged at my gate, grabbing the chain with both hands, grunting like he was starring in some action movie. His buddy joined him, straining against the lock. The padlock groaned, metal screeching as dust whipped around them. "Back away from the gate," a SWAT officer barked, his voice slicing through the chaos. But adrenaline is a dangerous drug. The dug deeper, veins bulging, until finally he reached for his holster. My stomach dropped. He pulled out what looked like a pistol, spray-painted black, the kind of toy you buy at a sporting goods store. Up close, it was laughable. From 10 feet away in the middle of a panic, it looked like a real gun. "Gun, drop it," the SWAT team thundered. Time slowed. They raised it halfway, just enough to seal his fate. And then, spotlight. A blinding white beam from the helicopter snapped onto him, pinning him like an insect under glass. Dust swirled, neighbors screamed, and his whole body sagged. The toy pistol clunked against the asphalt. Hands on his head, he dropped to his knees. The cul-de-sac erupted. Kids cried, parents yanked them back. Mrs. Parker fainted into her husband's arms. Neighbors who had once whispered about my non-compliance were now shouting, "Get them out of here." Through it all, Karen's voice pierced the storm. "This is harassment. These are my officers. I demand you arrest that man." She jabbed her finger at me again, but her authority was gone. The crowd wasn't buying it anymore. The fear she had ruled with for years cracked like glass under a hammer. I couldn't resist. I cupped my hands and shouted over the noise. "Karen, your little HOA Halloween party is over. Go home." The laughter that followed cut deeper than any rifle. Nervous, relieved, bitter laughter, neighbors who had been afraid to look me in the eye now laughing at her. And Karen felt it. Her eyes went wide, her face blotchy red. She shoved past a SWAT officer, raising her clipboard like she was going to strike me through the bars. "This is my neighborhood," she shrieked. "You don't belong here." She didn't get to finish. The officer caught her wrist mid-swing, twisting the clipboard free. Papers scattered into the wind, swirling like leaves. Fake summonses, bogus fines, and counterfeit compliance letters rained across the cul-de-sac like confetti at a parade. Neighbors gasped. Kids pointed. For me, it was poetry, Karen's empire literally blowing away in the dirt. "Ma'am, step back," the officer ordered firmly. But Karen thrashed like a wildcat. "Don't touch me, I'm the president." From the back of the crowd, a voice cut in. "Not anymore." Laughter erupted again, real, booming laughter this time. The sound Karen had spent years crushing was now drowning her out. The fake cops lay sprawled on the pavement, their own zip ties biting into their wrists. Their swagger was gone. The SWAT team cataloged their equipment, toy radios, duct-taped flashlights, the pistol still smoking with dust. One officer turned to me at the gate. "Sir, are you all right?" I nodded, steady but buzzing inside. "Better than them," I said, gesturing to the pile of groaning on the asphalt. Karen whipped around at my words, her voice shrill. "This isn't over. I'll sue you. I'll sue all of you." I shook my head, couldn't resist one last jab. "Karen, the only thing you should sue is your tailor for that blazer." Even the SWAT officer cracked the faintest smirk. And as the helicopters thumped overhead, spotlight cutting across the cul-de-sac, I realized something. Karen's reign of fear wasn't just ending, it was imploding in spectacular fashion. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end, because bullies like her don't go quietly. And the truth of what she'd built, the scheme behind these fake cops, the money, the lies, that hadn't even begun to come out yet. If you've ever seen a queen stripped of her crown in front of her entire court, you know the silence that follows isn't peaceful. It's heavy. It's final. That's what settled over the cul-de-sac as Karen's clipboard hit the dirt and her papers scattered like dead leaves. The woman who had ruled with gossip and fines was standing there, red blazer flapping in the rotor wash, and for the first time in years her kingdom wasn't bowing. It was laughing. They lay flat, their wrists zip-tied behind their backs, faces pressed into the asphalt. Their radios crackled nonsense, one even squawking a local FM station. SWAT officers worked with mechanical efficiency, securing each man, cataloging their toy weapons, and sweeping the fake SUVs. It wasn't chaos anymore. It was cleanup. But Karen, she wasn't ready to accept defeat. Even in handcuffs, she twisted and spat like a feral cat caught in a cage. "You don't understand," she shrieked. "I am the law here. These men are legitimate. He's the criminal." Her eyes locked on me through the gate, wild and desperate. The SWAT commander didn't flinch. His voice cut clean and calm through the dust storm. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for conspiracy, impersonating law enforcement, and obstruction of justice. Stay quiet." Karen howled, thrashing against the cuffs. "I'm the president of this HOA." I couldn't resist. My voice carried over the crowd. "And now you're the vice president of making terrible life choices." A ripple of laughter broke across the cul-de-sac. Even one officer shook his head, trying not to grin. The helicopters thundered overhead, their spotlights slicing through the dust, while SWAT officers opened the vehicles. Out spilled duffel bags stuffed with fake uniforms, laminated citations, and rolls of duct tape. One clipboard was covered in bogus arrest warrants, written in Comic Sans of all things. The absurdity of it all hit me in a wave. I almost doubled over laughing. The neighbors gasped as the evidence piled up. The Wilson boy whispered to his mother, they were going to take him away. She hugged him, her face pale. Mr. Parker muttered, "All this just to make a man mow his lawn their way. This neighborhood lost its mind." Then came the gut punch. One SWAT officer held up envelopes of cash pulled from the SUVs. Payment ledgers. These individuals were compensated in cash by Karen Morgan. He held up a sheet with her handwriting clear as day. This came directly from HOA funds. The crowd erupted. Phones zoomed in on Karen, her face pale as chalk. She screeched, "That's not mine, those are planted." But the neighbors weren't listening anymore. They weren't afraid. They were angry. "You scared our kids," one mother shouted. "You could gotten us all killed," a man roared from the sidewalk. The tide had turned completely. Karen's power, once built on whispers and intimidation, was evaporating under the heat of public outrage. I leaned against my gate, phone steady in my hand, recording every second. "Folks," I said, loud enough for them all to hear, "this is what happens when bullies run unchecked. They start thinking they're kings, or in this case, queens with fake cops." That line landed like a thunderclap. The laughter that followed wasn't nervous anymore. It was free. It was relief. For the first time, people weren't afraid of Karen. They were mocking her, and you could see it cut her to the bone. She spun on her, screeching like a banshee. "Don't say a word, I'll handle this." But they were already crumbling. One muttered, "She said the sheriff was in on it." Another groaned, "We thought she had authority." "Ma'am," the officer beside her said firmly, "the only thing you'll be handling is a court date." The laughter that broke out then, it was the sound of years of fear breaking apart. By now they were being marched to real patrol vehicles, their fake swagger replaced by bowed heads and slumped shoulders. One sobbed openly. The others shuffled silently, the reality of their situation crashing down like a tidal wave. Karen's voice, once sharp enough to silence a neighborhood, was nothing more than background noise, shrill, desperate, irrelevant. I walked closer to the gate, careful not to cross the line. My phone still rolling, I called out, "Remember this, folks. Real authority doesn't come from clipboards or gossip. It doesn't need fake badges or cheap uniforms. Real authority stands on truth." A cheer went up, neighbors clapped, some even whistled. Mrs. Parker, revived and teary-eyed, whispered, "Thank God." Karen's face twisted with rage. "You think you've won? This isn't over." I raised my brows, calm, steady. "Karen, the only thing that's not over is your legal bills." Even the SWAT commander cracked a faint grin before turning back to his men. The helicopters peeled off, their roar fading into the distance. They were secured. Karen was shoved into the back of a squad car, her once pristine blazer rumpled, her hair wild, and for the first time the cul-de-sac felt lighter. The fear that had hung over it like a storm cloud was gone. The Wilson boy caught my eye from the crowd. He whispered through the bars of my gate, "You're not the bad guy." I crouched down, smiling at him. "No, son, sometimes the loudest voice isn't the right one, remember that." But even as the adrenaline started to fade, I knew deep down this was just the beginning. Karen might been in cuffs, her fake cops hauled away, but the scheme behind it all, the money, the lies, the deeper rot, none of that had come to light yet. And something told me when it did, it would be uglier than anyone here could imagine. When the last of the SUVs pulled away, when the thump of the helicopters finally faded into the hills, the silence that followed was almost surreal. For weeks, the cul-de-sac had lived under the weight of Karen's shadow. Every clipboard slap, every rumor, every bogus letter had been designed to keep people quiet. But now, as her red blazer disappeared into the back of a patrol car, the silence wasn't fear anymore. It was freedom. Neighbors lingered in clusters, whispering, phones still in their hands. The air smelled like dust and gasoline, the kind you only get when a storm of engines rolls through a quiet street. Kids tugged on their parents' sleeves, asking if it was really over. Some people looked relieved, others angry, but all of them were shaken. Mrs. Parker, still pale from fainting earlier, made her way toward me. Her hands trembled as she reached across the gate. I'm sorry," she stammered, tears in her eyes. "I let her scare me into silence. I thought maybe she was right." I shook my head. "Fear makes people do strange things. Don't beat yourself up. What matters is she's not in control anymore." Behind her, Mr. Parker muttered, She was power-hungry, but she lost her mind. His voice carried just far enough for others to hear, and soon a ripple of agreement passed through the crowd. People nodded, exchanged looks, even chuckled nervously. For the first time since I'd moved here, the neighbors weren't looking at me like a threat. They were looking at her like a monster they'd finally unmasked. That night the videos started spreading. Clips of the fake cops fumbling with zip ties, Karen shrieking at the SWAT team, and the helicopters flooding the neighborhood with light. All of it was online before I even had a chance to upload my own footage. By morning, local news had already picked it up. Fake HOA police arrested in bizarre standoff, SWAT intervenes. One grainy photo of Karen, hair wild, blazer wrinkled, screaming as she was shoved into the patrol car, was plastered across every channel. If you didn't know better, you'd think it was a soap opera promo, not a news story. The calls started almost immediately. Folks I barely knew stopped me at the diner, the gas station, even the feed store. "Hey, aren't you the guy with the HOA cops?" They'd shake their heads in disbelief, half laughing, half angry. Some dropped pies at my door, others brought casseroles or a six-pack of beer, saying, "For standing your ground." It was surreal. But beneath the relief, beneath the jokes and laughter, there was something darker threading through the neighborhood. Because the more details trickled out, the uglier Karen's scheme looked. The sheriff's office released a preliminary report within 2 days. Turns out they weren't just some random neighbors playing dress-up. They were hired muscle from a nearby town. Karen had paid them in cash, money pulled straight from the HOA's discretionary fund. Funds that were supposed to cover landscaping, pool maintenance, community events. Instead, she spent it on uniforms ordered from a discount tactical gear site. She altered the patches herself, turned her home computer into a counterfeit printer, and stamped everything with a fake golden seal she'd downloaded off the internet. She'd spent weeks preparing her little coup, all to drag me into compliance with rules that never even applied to my land. When that truth hit the neighborhood, fury replaced fear. At the emergency HOA meeting, people shouted over one another, fists slammed on tables. "I pay dues for community safety, not for Karen to play dictator," one man bellowed. "She put all of us in danger," cried another. Board members, once loyal to Karen, resigned on the spot. Nobody wanted to be tied to her mess. The HOA, once feared like some shadow government, was crumbling in real time. Meanwhile, Karen sat in county lockup, her charges stacking higher by the day. Conspiracy, impersonation of law enforcement, harassment, misuse of funds. Word spread fast that she'd been bail. The strangest part was how quickly the neighborhood changed once her grip loosened. People who used to avoid me now lingered at my fence, swapping stories and laughing about the fiasco. The Wilson kids played catch by my driveway again. Mrs. Parker brought me another pie, apologizing through tears. "Never again," she said. "Never again will I let her scare me into silence." And in that moment I realized this wasn't just about me. The whole neighborhood had been under her thumb. They weren't just relieved she was gone, they were free. But freedom has a cost. And as the news dug deeper, as reporters uncovered how long Karen had been fabricating fines and inflating penalties, the real horror came into focus. Families shared their stories, fined thousands for lawn ornaments, for bikes left in the driveway, for shutters painted the wrong shade of beige. Her fake police stunt was just the grand finale of years of abuse. Sitting on my porch one evening, iced tea sweating in my hand, I replayed it all in my head. The fake sirens, the SUVs, the cheap badges, the neighbors gasping. It all could have ended so much worse. One twitchy finger, one panicked move, and those toy weapons might have gotten someone shot. That thought stayed with me. Because for all the laughter and relief, the truth was chilling. She almost pulled it off. She almost convinced an entire community that her fantasy was law. And as much as I enjoyed seeing her in cuffs, I knew the story wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The deeper we dug, the uglier it was going to get. The days that followed felt like living inside a headline. By the very next morning, the story had already hit every local station. Anchors sat in their polished studios, shaking their heads as they read the script. Fake HOA police arrested in bizarre standoff. Real SWAT intervenes. On the screen, they replayed the same clips over and over, Karen in her red blazer screaming as she was shoved into a patrol car. The lined up on the asphalt, their zip ties biting into their wrists. Neighbors shielding their kids as helicopters thundered overhead. It looked like a scene from a movie, but we all knew it was. It was our neighborhood. And suddenly, my quiet farmhouse at the edge of Pine Ridge Estates was no longer just that corner property. It was ground zero for one of the strangest HOA scandals anyone had ever seen. Strangers stopped me at the grocery store. "Aren't you the guy with the fake cops?" they asked, half laughing, half serious. At the gas station, the clerk leaned across the counter. "I saw you on TV. Man, you handled yourself better than I would." At the feed store, an old rancher clapped me on the shoulder and said, "About time someone stood up to her." It was surreal. For months, Karen had painted me as the outcast, the dangerous outsider. Now people I'd never met were calling me a hero. But under the relief and laughter, the darker truth was starting to unravel. The sheriff's department held a press conference 2 days later. What they revealed stunned even me. The men Karen called her security force weren't neighbors at all. They were hired muscle, guys she'd recruited from a neighboring town, paid in cash. Cash pulled straight from the HOA's discretionary budget, the money homeowners thought was going toward landscaping, pool maintenance, and community events. Investigators showed photos of duffel bags found in the fake SUVs. Inside were receipts, uniform orders from an online tactical gear site, boxes of toy weapons painted black, and stacks of counterfeit citations Karen had printed from her home computer. She'd even ordered a gold embossing machine online to make her fake seal look official. It wasn't improvisation. It was premeditated. Weeks, maybe months of planning, all to arrest me for rules that didn't even apply to my property. The neighborhood was furious. At the emergency HOA meeting held in the clubhouse 2 nights later, the place was packed wall to wall. People who had once kept their heads down now shouted at the top of their lungs. "I pay my dues for community safety, not for Karen to play dictator," one man roared. "She put every one of us in danger," a mother shouted, clutching her child's hand. Another neighbor waved one of Karen's bogus letters in the air. "She fined me $200 for a lawn gnome. A lawn gnome." The board sat at the front of the room, pale and sweating. When residents demanded answers, none of them could speak. By the end of the night, half the board had resigned on the spot. The rest followed within the week. The HOA, once feared like some shadow government, was disintegrating before our eyes. Karen herself, she sat in county jail, bail. The charges stacked higher every day: conspiracy, impersonating law enforcement, misuse of funds, harassment, fraud. And yet, even behind bars, her shadow still loomed. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat on my porch sipping iced tea when the Wilson boy pedaled up to my gate. He shifted nervously, his sneakers dragging in the dirt. "Mister," he said quietly, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Mom said we shouldn't talk to you, but you stood up to her. Nobody else did." I smiled, ruffling his hair through the gate. "That's all right, son. The truth has a way of coming out sooner or later." He grinned, nodded, then asked the question I knew was coming. "Do you think she'll come back?" I looked out across the fields, the sun painting everything gold. "Not in the way you remember her," I said. And with that, he smiled, satisfied, and pedaled away. The neighborhood was healing, slowly but surely. People lingered at fences again, swapping stories. Kids played in the cul-de-sac without glancing nervously over their shoulders. Mrs. Parker brought me another pie, tears in her eyes as she apologized again. "Never again," she whispered. "Never again will I let someone scare me like that." But as the laughter returned, so did the deeper questions. Because the truth was, Karen hadn't been an isolated tyrant. She was part of a bigger problem. The reporters dug deeper, and what they found made my stomach turn. Karen had been fabricating fines for years, inflating dues, pocketing HOA funds for personal projects. One report showed she'd used HOA money to remodel her kitchen, new granite counters, top-of-the-line appliances. Another uncovered how she doctored inspection forms to punish families who her. It was a long con, and the fake police stunt, that was just the grand finale. Sitting there on my porch, I thought about how close it had come. Those toy weapons, the pistol, the stun baton, any of it could have been mistaken for real in the heat of the moment. One wrong move, one panic trigger pull, and this story might ended in tragedy. The thought sent a chill down my spine. Because for all the relief and all the laughter, the truth was sobering. Karen almost convinced an entire community to believe her fantasy. And if she could do it here, how many other neighborhoods across the country were living under their own version of her? That question stuck with me, and I had a feeling the fallout was only just beginning. Trials don't begin the way the movies make you think. There's no thunderclap, no dramatic music when the gavel drops. It starts with whispers, reporters adjusting cameras, neighbors shifting nervously in the gallery, the quiet scrape of chairs on linoleum floors. And there she was, Karen Morgan, escorted into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, hair tied back, eyes flashing like she was still the queen of Pine Ridge Estates. The sight drew a murmur through the crowd. For years, we'd seen her in heels and blazers, clipboard in hand. Now stripped of her costume, she looked smaller, but her expression, defiant, unbroken. Even in shackles, Karen carried herself like she was running the meeting. The prosecutor wasted no time. He laid out the case like stacking bricks. Misuse of funds, conspiracy, fraud, impersonating law enforcement. A dozen charges, each heavier than the last. Then came the evidence, duffel bags filled with counterfeit uniforms, fake citations, toy weapons, receipts showing HOA money funneled into her schemes. Photos of her kitchen remodel, receipts paid for in HOA checks. It was all there. And the worst part, she didn't even flinch. Karen sat back in her chair, arms crossed, smirking like this was all beneath her. But the neighbors, they weren't smirking, they were furious. One by one, families took the stand. Mrs. Parker's voice shook as she recounted the fines Karen had slapped on her late husband for leaving a ladder by the shed. $50 a day, she whispered. He cried at the kitchen table, wondering how we'd pay it, and all the while she was stealing from us. A young mother sobbed as she described the night Karen threatened to have her children removed from the community if she didn't repaint her shutters. An older man slammed his fist on the rail, his voice cracking. She stole 20 grand from me in bogus penalties, 20 grand. Every testimony peeled another layer off Karen's carefully constructed mask, and slowly her smirk began to falter. But it wasn't until the sheriff took the stand that the courtroom truly shifted. He described the day of the standoff, the fake cops with toy weapons, the moment a pistol nearly triggered a deadly response. The gallery gasped. If any of my men had misread that situation, the sheriff said gravely, we'd be here talking about funerals. For the first time, Karen's face drained of color. I sat in the back, silent, recording it all in my memory. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about everyone she had trampled, and watching her empire crumble piece by piece, I felt something I hadn't in months. Closure. When it was her turn to speak, Karen did what Karen always did. She turned on the performance. Her voice trembled, her hands clasped like she was the victim. I only wanted what was best for the community, she insisted. I was protecting our standards, our reputation. I didn't mean for it to go this far. The room groaned. Someone muttered, liar. Another hissed, shame. Even the judge had to pound the gavel to restore order. But no amount of theatrics could erase the evidence. The jury saw it. The neighbors saw it. We all saw it. After 3 weeks of testimony, the verdict came. Guilty, on nearly every count. Karen's mask cracked at last. She screamed at the jury, at the judge, at the reporters scribbling notes. This isn't justice. This is a witch hunt. You'll regret this. She had to be dragged from the courtroom, her shrieks echoing down the hall. And just like that, the reign of Karen Morgan was over. The sentence was swift. Years in state prison. Restitution payments to the families she had drained. Her legacy reduced to a headline about corruption and cruelty. Outside the courthouse, the neighbors gathered in a cluster. The same people who had once avoided eye contact now shook hands, hugged, even cried together. For the first time, Pine Ridge Estates didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a community again. One man turned to me, his voice thick with emotion. You stood up to her when the rest of us were too scared. We owe you. I shook my head. You don't owe me anything. You just owe yourselves the promise to never let someone like her run your lives again." Mrs. Parker dabbed at her eyes, whispering, "Never again." And as the cameras flashed, as the courthouse steps filled with laughter and relief, I realized something important. Karen's story wasn't just our story anymore. It was a warning, a lesson about what happens when fear is left unchecked. Because sometimes the biggest battles don't happen on distant battlefields. They happen right in our neighborhoods, behind white fences and freshly mowed lawns. And sometimes the heroes aren't soldiers or judges or officers. Sometimes they're just ordinary people who refuse to bow. Months passed. The storm that had ripped through our quiet cul-de-sac finally began to settle, leaving behind something strange: peace. Without Karen's shadow looming over every fence and mailbox, Pine Ridge Estates felt almost unrecognizable. The HOA collapsed within weeks of her sentencing. With the board gone and the funds frozen by investigators, there was nothing left to enforce. No more threatening letters tucked under doors. No more fines for kids' bikes or lawn ornaments. The neighbors, once divided by fear, now waved to each other in the mornings. They lingered on sidewalks, chatted over fences, and for the first time in years, the sound of laughter carried down the street. It was as if the community itself was breathing again. One evening I stood at my gate as the sun dipped low. The air smelled of cut grass, the kind of smell that used to bring arguments about community standards. Now it was just life, ordinary, beautiful. The Wilson kids were riding their bikes in circles, their laughter echoing through the cul-de-sac. Mrs. Parker waved from her porch, pie cooling on the railing. And the Parkers, who once muttered about troublemakers, invited me over for coffee. Little things, but they meant everything. Still, I couldn't shake the weight of what had almost happened. Because for every smile, every wave, I remembered the roar of helicopters, the fake badges flashing, the moment a toy gun nearly turned into tragedy. Sometimes at night, I'd sit on my porch and replay it in my mind. The fumbling with zip ties, Karen screaming at the SWAT team, neighbors frozen in fear. One wrong move, and this community could have been mourning instead of laughing. That thought haunted me. But it also taught me something I think everyone needs to hear. The real danger isn't always the loudest threat. Sometimes it's the quiet kind. The kind that hides behind rules, clipboards, and fake authority. The kind that convinces ordinary people to look the other way. Fear doesn't need guns or badges, it just needs silence. And for too long, that's what Karen thrived on: silence. It wasn't until someone said, "Enough," that her empire cracked. And when it did, the whole neighborhood realized they'd been stronger than her all along. Life went on. The fake cops were sentenced to probation for some, jail for others. Karen was moved to a state prison 2 counties over, her name reduced to a headline about fraud and insanity. Rumor had it she still tried running meetings from inside, barking orders at anyone who would listen. But out here, her voice was gone. One morning, a reporter came by. She asked if I felt like I'd won. I thought about that for a long time. Did I win? Sure, Karen was gone, the fake cops exposed, the HOA dissolved, but winning didn't feel like the right word, because this was never a game. It was survival. It was neighbors rediscovering their voices. It was a community remembering that fear only has power if you feed it. So I told her the truth. I don't feel like I won. I feel like we finally woke up. She scribbled it in her notebook, nodded, and left. But I meant every word. And here's the part that stuck with me most. People started reaching out from other towns, other neighborhoods. They'd seen the story online, read the articles, watched the videos. Some said, "We have our own Karen." Others whispered about fake fines, bullying boards, HOA leaders who thought they were kings. Our story wasn't just ours anymore. It was a mirror for thousands of others. And maybe that's the lesson. Maybe that's the whole point. Sometimes the strongest stand isn't about fists or guns or shouting the loudest. Sometimes it's about standing your ground, calmly, quietly, with nothing more than the truth in your hands. I think about that every time I hear the Wilson kids laughing in the cul-de-sac. Every time Mrs. Parker leaves a pie at my gate. Every time a neighbor waves without fear in their eyes. Karen tried to build her kingdom on fear. In the end, all she did was remind us what freedom felt like. And maybe, just maybe, that was the best thing she ever did. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next mystery on HOA Hunter Stories.